Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Clayton, for your testimony. There was some talk earlier in this hearing about efforts to repeal or dramatically scale back Dodd-Frank. I think it's important to remember that Dodd-Frank was a response to the financial meltdown and a lot of bad practices that went on that helped precipitate that and left a lot of people around this country in foreclosure and holding the bag. As you know, last year, Goldman Sachs agreed to a $5 billion settlement in a lawsuit that arose out of what happened during the financial meltdown. The acting associate attorney general at the Justice Department at the time said, and I quote, this resolution referring to the settlement agreement holds Goldman Sachs accountable for its serious misconduct in falsely assuring investors that securities it sold were backed by sound mortgages when it knew that they were full of mortgages that were likely to fail, unquote. This was a very serious breach of trust with respect to Goldman's clients. You mentioned at the outset that you wanted to put an end to shady practices. Would you agree that what Goldman did during that period in falsely assuring investors that securities it sold were backed by sound mortgages when it knew they weren't was a shady practice?
Senator, I think that settlement speaks for itself. I'm not familiar with all of the facts of that matter, but I think the settlement speaks for itself.
Well, let me ask you, you represented Goldman Sachs, right?
I have, yes.
Did you represent Goldman Sachs in any of the transactions that were the basis of the Justice Department finding of misconduct?
My understanding is that was a mortgage, a case of selling mortgage securities. I can tell you that I did not work on any mortgage securities deals for any client that I could, I'm very confident. Any mortgage security deal for any client prior to the financial crisis. It was not part of my practice.
Got it. And so you were not involved in advising some of the investors with respect to the financial instruments that were the subject of the settlement?
I want to be very clear. After the financial crisis, I did become familiar with mortgage-backed securities and how they worked. Spent a lot of time trying to understand how they worked. And after the crisis, I have advised a number of people on how those securities were designed to function. But prior to the crisis, mortgage-backed securities were not part of my practice.
All right. Well, just to pick up on what Senator Heidkamp said, and I've heard my Republican colleagues say it many times, that we think that a lot of these settlement agreements where nobody is actually held personally accountable and personally liable actually do not create the kind of deterrence that we want. So I hope going forward, the American public will see people not just using their investors' money to pay off settlements, but actually be held personally accountable. Let me ask you this, because there are some disagreements with respect to what's happened at the SEC and its role. Do you think that a stockholder would have an interest in knowing if the